true self is without form.
Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how I created this Zenyatta Orb from the game Overwatch using only a 3D printer, some paints, and some EL wire for illumination. And we're going to cover everything from printer settings right up to finding the appropriate display stand. So first, let's talk about filament. Now, quality matters more than anything here. And there's an age-old saying that is, you get what you pay for, and this really rings true in this regard. Now, cheap filament, more often than not, is not very consistent. It could have different widths through the roll, so some of the roll might be 1.75 mil, rest of it might be 1.8. You know, it can affect the print. Also, it may not be perfectly round. That can also affect your print in a negative way, but the biggest way is air bubbles throughout the filament. Now, what you'll hear is while you're printing, you'll hear these small little pops. And what that is the air, as it's going through the nozzle, the plastic's getting compressed down, and it's actually popping, and that'll leave a defect on your print. And if that's on your outer surface layer, that's something you're going to have to deal with in finishing. So it's not preferable to have cheap filament. So I always personally use 1.75mm PLA filament from an Australian company because I'm Australian. They are 3D Phillies, and it is excellent. Now, they're not paying me to say this at all. I've used a lot of filament, and I'm just telling you straight up, it is the best filament I've ever used by a long way. So if you're in Australia, check them out. If not, see if they ship overseas. Like if you're in New Zealand, it still might be cost effective to send it there. If you're like in the US or Europe, it's probably not going to be effective to ship filament from Australia to your country, but you should be able to find something locally that is of the same quality. And it is a little bit of a trial and error, so just buy one roll at a time when you're trying out a new filament, get all your stepper settings right and all that kind of stuff, and you should be pretty happy with the results as long as the quality of that filament is good. So when I go about a print, before I even do any printing, I sit there and I think about what am I going to use this part for. Is it going to be a finished piece, or is it going to be, you know, a piece that I'm going to mold, so is it going to become a master? And then I try and do my settings based on what I'm going to use it for. I also think, is this going to be an internal piece? If so, the print settings don't need to be as high. I can save on plastic, that kind of stuff. So I'll try and set each piece individually in my slicer, which is Simplify 3D, but the settings I'm going to give you today will work in any slicer. It doesn't really matter. It's the Simplify 3D is my preferred slicing program. So with all those considerations in mind, I decided to print everything in a 0.1 of a millimeter layer height. Now, the reason I did that is this isn't going to be cast in resin or anything like that, so it's going to be the final piece. So I want to save some time during finishing, because if you print at a 0.2 or even a 0.3, you are going to have a lot of finishing work there. You're going to get a lot of those little classic layer dimples that you see with 3D printing, and you have to sand all of them smooth. That goes away by a lot with 0.1. So if you have the time, definitely stick with a 0.1 millimeter of a layer height for any type of finishing piece. So the other thing that I changed was the outer layers. So they're usually four layers thick. I went 6 layers thick on this purely because this is a round orb. I really wanted to get it nice and smooth and shiny, so I wanted that little bit of extra wiggle room just for sanding, because there's nothing worse than you're sanding away. You go through that outer layer and then you've got to start filling, and then you're almost at the point where you just reprint the entire part because you've got that defect that is really hard to fix. So I decided to try and avoid that in this project and go with the 6 layer thickness as opposed to 4. And yeah, I printed the supports where needed, and I'm not going to lie, because I printed at 0.1, the entire print of this orb took 23 hours. That's not finishing, that's not sanding, that is just straight printing. So yeah, let that run, printed all of the pieces, and once that was done, I was moving on to finishing. So this is the point where we can make a few choices. So like I was speaking about before, you can just paint this if you want. You can just go and paint it and be done with it if you want. Me, personally, that's not my style. I like to get things smooth, looking nice, and looking as realistic as possible. So I'll do a lot of finishing, and that's where a lot of 3D printing work and a lot of prop work in general, that's where most of the time is spent, is finishing the part. The 3D print, even though it took 23 hours, I can do other things while I'm doing that. You know, I can go to work, sleep, whatever I need to do, and it'll just print away. But finishing, you have to spend the time, and you really need to be as methodical as possible. So the first step that I do is I'll take a print and I'll look at it straight off the bed, and I will get a small pair of clippers, and I'll run my fingers over it, and I'll look at it, and I'll look for any defects, so like anything that's support related that might still be attached to the piece. I'll try and trim them as flush to the surface as possible. This is purely to save on sanding more than anything. So with this particular prop, because it's a sphere, like the main orb is completely round, there was a lot of support material around the bottom to get those first, you know, quarter of the orb right, and then the support material was no longer needed. But a side effect of that was that the bottom of the orb was really, really rough. So I spent a lot of time on that, again, clipping, feeling around, trying to remove as much of the defects as possible with the clippers. And then once that was done, I took a 240 grit sandpaper and gave the entire surface a really, really good sand. Again, spending a lot of time on the bottom of the orb, purely because I needed to get it flush and looking nice again. So I did spend a lot of time there, and I even ended up using a Dremel sanding disc on it as well, just to get that flat. Now you do have to be careful, because this is PLA, it does have a low melting point. So what you want to do is you want to, even hand sanding, sand an area for a little bit, move to another area, sand that, then come back to the first bit, just to let the surface cool down so you don't sort of warp it or get that smearing or anything like that. So you just do quick little sands, move to the next one, quick little sands, move to the next spot, quick little sands, and then sort of go around in a circular pattern, and you will get a nice finish. It does take a little bit longer, but again, you need to be careful with something like PLA, because its melting point is so low that you can destroy the piece by sanding too vigorously. And yeah, it's not fun when that happens. Trust me, I've done it more than once. So yeah, you just got to be careful with it. Just sand, take as long as you need as well, right? So if you're done with an area, move to the next area, then come back and look at the first area, and then do it again if you need to. I mean, if you're not in a rush, just spend as much time with this original sand as you can to get it as nice as possible. So once I finished my sanding, I was left with this, and I'm going to show you the bottom as to what it came out to be. So it still looks very rough, but it is completely smooth. It is still completely round as well. There are no flat spots or anything like that, and that was because I was taking the time on moving to different areas and not allowing the plastic to heat up too much. Okay, so we're done with our first sanding, so it's probably a good time to talk about paint, or at least, even if you're not watching this video, you're doing it yourself, you start thinking about, how am I going to paint this, how is it going to look? And I used a lot of reference material for Zenyatta's Orb. Now, Zenyatta's Orb is, I think it's gold, I'm not sure, it's gold colored, but it's very metallic and shiny. So what I was thinking was, I need something really, really shiny here. So I had the idea of using automotive paints. So there is another great product that's also from an automotive range, and that's a primer filler, and that's the first one that I used. And this is really, really great stuff. It's good for filling in small little dimples and all that kind of stuff, just spraying straight out of the can, but it's also excellent at showing larger defects. Now, when I was sanding this, I did not see a couple of the larger defects, purely because it's bright orange. But as soon as I put that primer on, they became abundantly clear, and we'll talk about how I filled them later. But that filler primer is great stuff. I use it on all of my prints, and go out and grab some if you can. So when it came to the paint, I thought this was a great place to really experiment with like a high gloss enamel paint, and high gloss enamels are used on cars. So you'll see a car is completely shiny, and it has that sort of depth. Like, it's hard to explain, but it's a top coat over the top as well, but it has that great depth to it, and it's really, really shiny. And the great thing about it is you can buy it in a spray can. So I went and got some high gloss enamel paint in a light gold, because that's Zenyatta's color. The orb is as a light gold, and yeah, I was going to apply that. I also thought about the detailed areas. Now, in all the reference material I had, they didn't look as reflective, so I settled with just a flat black acrylic paint that I'll paint on with some fine paintbrushes after. So the first coat's going to be all gold, and then I'll do the trimming later. And then the top coat. Now, the top coat's especially cool because it's also a car automotive part. It's a top coat that they spray onto cars, and again comes in a rattle can if you want to. You get it in a rattle can, that is. And what you can do is, then I had an idea, because this is a car paint, I had some ideas about finishing, and I'll go into more detail and show you how I completely finish that later, but it is really cool. The paints are a little expensive. I think I was paying about 15 Australian dollars per bottle for the gold, and I only ended up using half a can, but that's beside the point. You still got to buy the whole can, and I think it was $18 for the top coat. So it is a little expensive, but I hope when you see the final part that you'll agree that it was well worth the expense. So now we move on to actually applying the first coat of primer, and what we want to do here is a very light, even coat. We want to cover all of the surface with the primer, but we want it to be very light and not very thick. So you start off to the side of the prop, and then you hold the trigger down, spray onto it, and then once you've moved off the prop, you actually let go. So you get that nice even coat by doing that, and we want to cover the entire prop itself and then let it dry. And then what you'll see is some areas will actually be nice and smooth, but then some of the defects will actually show. And I had a couple of defects in my piece where there was lines across it in certain areas. It happens with 3D printing, you get those little defects, so I decided to fill them with an epoxy putty. The epoxy putty that I use is called Knead It. What it is it's epoxy, but it's like a dough, and you can apply it, you can mold it, you can do whatever you want. It takes about 10 minutes to dry, and then you can sand it flush or do whatever you want with it. It's great stuff. I'm sure it's available in every country, probably under a different name though, but I know it as Knead It. So what I'm doing there is I am putting it onto the surface really thick, and I'm working it into those cracks really hard, pushing it in, and then wiping most of it off. And you'll see that most of those cracks will actually just disappear. You'll still be able to just see them, but when you do another coat of primer, you won't see them at all. And that makes a really strong surface because that epoxy dries rock hard. It's not going to be squishy. You can sand it. You can do whatever you want. It's great. So I went around the entire piece, filled any areas that I needed to do, any low areas as well, you can see. So I filled them up, made them nice and smooth, gave it another top coat and sand, and kept repeating that process until I was happy that it was all filled. And then I did a final top coat. Well, sorry, it wasn't a final, it was the second final of primer. And I then worked my way right up to about a 600 grit wet and dry sand, and that got it nice and smooth. Now you don't have to do that, but I wasn't happy with the surface prior to that, so that's why I went to the 600 grit wet and dry sand, just getting the sandpaper in a little bit of water and wiping it over and sanding it down. Now I spent roughly 8 hours sanding this. I'm not going to lie to you, that is a lot for me anyway, but I was pretty happy with those results. So then I gave it one last coat of primer and prepped it for paint. Now this is where I have to apologize profusely because the footage of me applying the paint is horrible. Basically, I thought I was in frame and I wasn't for most of it. So I'll show bits of it, and again I apologize, it won't happen again. And it's a screw up on my behalf, and I do apologize. But what I was doing was, this is a two-part process with the paint. You're applying it in the same technique as the primer, where you start off the prop and then you move across the prop and then off again, let go of the trigger. But the first coat is very light, so light that you can still see the primer underneath. And what you want to do then is let that be touch dry, so just as it's a little bit sticky, it doesn't have to be completely dry. And then you want to go through with a heavy coat and let that completely dry, then go over it again. And what that's going to do is going to give you a nice even finish, and your reflective surface is going to reflect the light evenly, like you won't see refractions through the paint. So if you're going to apply this enamel, I would do it like that. And then once that's dried, the only thing that is wrong with this enamel paint is drying is not curing. So it can be touch dry, but if you actually push on it hard after it's dry, you will still indent it, and that's because it hasn't cured. Now, enamel paint, unless you want to bake it and do all of these fancy things with really expensive equipment, which I don't have, you need to let it cure by itself, which does take about 4 days. So I did have to leave my prop for 4 days to fully harden and get completely cured before I did anything else. But once that was done, I basically took my black acrylic paint, my fine paintbrushes, and I painted in all of the other details. Now I did do this freehand, but feel free to tape the part up if you want. I've got pretty steady hands, so it came out all right for me. So we've finished all of our painting, and now we're ready for our final top coat. So this was done with the same technique as everything else. with the spraying and leaving the prop and before you let go of the trigger and all that kind of stuff. But it was done in 3 coats. So the first one was a very light coat again, and then it was the 2 heavier coats, but leave it to dry for about 4 hours in between, just so it starts to get that glisten. When you actually spray it on, it's not going to look that reflective, and that's because it hasn't cured. It actually, the more it cures, the more reflective it's going to be. So let it dry for 4 hours in between coats. Once you get to about 3, you might have to do more if you're not happy with the reflective surfaces or if you've missed parts. But yeah, I ended up with just doing 3 coats. So let that cure. I even the last coat, just for, you know, my own personal peace of mind, I let it dry overnight, and we're on the home stretch now. Now, because this is all automotive paint, it means that I can actually buff this up. And what I used was a good quality car wax, so something that you would actually apply to your car. I used that to get a really high gloss finish. So I just got a small amount of it on a microfiber cloth, rubbed it into all the surfaces, and then took another part of that microfiber cloth that was clean and dry, and then I buffed the hell out of it just so it became up reflective. And if you look at that surface, that looks incredible in my mind. So if you want a reflective surface on a 3D part, use automotive paint and then wax it. You could even do another varnish over the top to protect that glossiness if you want. I didn't do that because this isn't going to be handled all that much, but it does come up fantastic. So now we're on to the final step. We've buffed everything up, everything's looking smick, but if you look on a Zenyatta Orb, there's actually blue glowing parts around the smaller discs. So what I did there was, rather than use little LEDs, because that would have used literally hundreds to get that nice consistent glow, is I used a thing called EL wire. And what that is it's a single wire that's covered in a phosphorus material, and it glows. There's a plastic sleeve over the top of it with a different color, and it glows, a single continuous line. Looks really cool. So yeah, I jumped on eBay. I found a 2.4 millimeter length of it. So that was its width. It was in 5 meter lengths. Turned out to be blind luck, because that little gap where it's supposed to go is 2.5 millimeters. So it literally fitted in perfectly. Bought that off eBay, got it delivered, and literally just threaded in, put all the excess on the inside with the inverter. And you know what? Even though that I've done that paint and it looks really fantastic, I think it's the EL wire that really makes this piece just stand out. So I'm really glad that I did that. So the final part of this was a stand, because it's a ball, it rolls around all the place. So rather than make one, I just sort of looked and I said, you know what, it kind of looks like a Pokeball. So I jumped on Thingiverse and I had a look at the Pokeballs, and there is a Pokeball file that you can download, and it includes this little base stand. It's really basic, and I think it suits this part very nicely, purely because it doesn't take over the part, it sort of just sits on it. So I just basically grabbed the entire thing, downloaded it, printed off the base, not the rest of the Pokeball, and hit that with a very quick primer, just a clear one, not the filler primer, and then just did a matte black over the top just to finish it, because I didn't want it bright orange. And that completed this prop. So that's the end of this entire build and the end of this video. If you do want to see more of these videos, let me know by hitting that subscribe button and the little notification. Just to give you a little teaser, I do have a Master Sword from Zelda, which I'll be cold casting with silver in the making right now. I have a thermal detonator from Star Wars, which I'm also going to be potentially casting, not 100% sure yet, but they will be finished in slightly different ways. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and the little notification tick box if you want to see how those were made also. And you know, I'm learning along the way, so it'd be good to see you guys learn along the way as well. You might learn something new, you may not, but it might be cool just to watch either way. And if you do want to have a go at making this Zenyatta Orb yourself, in the description box below I do have a link to all of the STL files that I used. Feel free to download them, print them out, and paint them however you want. And if you do end up making one, please share it with me. I'd love to see if you guys can get different techniques going or different finishes. I just love all of that stuff. So leave me a comment with a link to a picture or something like that of it. And yeah, if you have any questions, also leave me a comment. I'll try and get to them as soon as I can. If it means making a new video on finishing or something, whatever the question is that it requires a video, I'm more than happy to do it also. So yeah, hit that subscribe button if you want to see all of that. If you think this video was good enough and I deserve it, please share it with your friends, share it on Facebook, share it wherever you like, or just leave it a like. Or don't do any of that, I don't mind either way. But yeah, I've really enjoyed making this video. There will be more, so stay tuned for the next one, guys. I'll see you all later.